The steel roared an inch above my face. Air burned my lungs as 100 wheels sliced the space where my head should have been. I tasted dust and oil and knew my daughter was smiling somewhere above me. When the last car screamed past and the tunnel fell quiet, I lay still, cheek pressed to cold gravel, and counted to 10. Then I rose, brushed grit from my jacket, and turned the platform. They stood together, side by side, hands linked like wedding cake figures. Their smiles were not wide, only neat, as if this were a small chore being crossed off a list. I lifted my eyes to theirs and felt the old calm come back, the one I used to have on storm crews. The crowd gasped and pointed. A phone camera's red light blinked. I nodded once to my daughter and her husband and promised myself that everything had just changed. My name is Ephraim Cole. I am 67 years old, and until last winter, I climbed poles for the power company in New York State. People call me a good hand. I worked nights in sleet and heat, quietly, the way my father taught me. I do not drink. I do not gamble. And the worst word I use is the one I learned in the Navy when a wrench falls on a toe. My wife, Laurel, died 9 years ago beside the garden she loved. I planted chrysanthemums for her every autumn and kept the porch light on even when I did not expect company. I raised one child, my daughter, with the care of a man setting a bone. I gave what I had, and when I had more, I gave that too. My daughter's name is Odessa. She has hair the color of old pennies and a voice that can turn hard without warning. When she was small, I walked to the bus stop and waited until the doors shut. I stitched her costumes for school plays with clumsy fingers and learned to braid after her mother was gone. I kept every drawing she made in a shoebox and every report card in a folder to show Laurel in my mind. When Odessa married, I refinished a farmhouse table for her, sanding in quiet circles until it shone like a lake at evening. I thought love was a fence that kept wolves out. I did not see how a fence can trap a man if it circles too tight. I did not see how love can become a debt someone thinks you owe forever. Her husband is named Calderpike. He has careful hair and careful shoes and a smile that shows only the top teeth. He speaks like a man reading terms and conditions. He sells financial advice to people who already have more than they need. The first time he shook my hand, he held on too long, like a boy testing his strength. He called me sir in a way that felt like a joke only he understood. Odessa said he was brilliant. I said he was ambitious. She told me not to be old-fashioned. When money trouble started, Calder said it was a temporary market thing. When the calls began, he said it was a misunderstanding. I offered to help, and he took the help quickly, as if he had already counted on it. He called it a bridge. The bridge kept getting longer. The morning they invited me to the city, the sky sat low and white over the buildings. Odessa said they had tickets to a gallery and then a late lunch. She slipped her arm through mine at the turnstile, like she used to do as a child. Calder bought the Metro cards and smiled at the clerk. The station at Riverside had that wet stone smell. Buskers played a sad, sweet song that followed us down the platform. The board said 5 minutes. Odessa talked about moving to a bigger apartment in a hotter neighborhood. Calder nodded at his watch. I offered to help them move when the time came, and I meant it. When the lights appeared in the tunnel, Odessa squeezed my elbow and asked whether I remembered teaching her to ride a bike in the parking lot of the hardware store. I said yes and felt warm for a second. The platform trembled. The push was not strong. That is what I will remember when I am old enough to forget my name. It was not rage. It was a firm suggestion between the shoulder blades. The crowd gasped. My boot skidded on the edge, and then the world tilted. I fell through stale air and hit the ties. The lights grew, bright as noon. Old habits saved me. On storm crews, men learn to move without thinking. I rolled into the gutter between the rails, tucked my head, flattened my body, and pressed my cheek to the stones. The train came like weather, blasting warmth and grit and noise. Paper blew, and the steel above me carved the dark. I counted the axles, just as I used to count the seconds between lightning and thunder. 1, 2, 3. Stay small, stay still, be part of the ground. When the last car passed, the tunnel breathed out. Someone screamed my name. Feet pounded on the platform. Doors chimed, and then closed again as if the city had decided to continue. I rose slowly, joints ticking like old switches, and stood with the weight of the world settling back into my bones. My palms were scraped. My jacket had torn at the elbow. I brushed off grit, because a man should not look beaten in front of people who want him beaten. A young man reached a hand down, and I thanked him and climbed the runged ladder set into the wall. My body shook only once, like a dog coming out of a river. Odessa and Calder waited. Their smiles were smaller now. "Good trick," Odessa said, and her voice shook. Calder's eyes were cold and busy. I looked past him at the crowd and saw phones held high, red dots burning. I have learned that when someone tries to end you, they often think they already have. That mistake is a gift. I stepped onto the platform and let the noise wash over me. People asked if I was hurt. I said I was fine. I asked for a napkin, and a woman gave me a clean one that smelled of oranges. I wiped my hands and said I wanted a cup of tea. Odessa blinked, confused by my calm. Calder told me there had been a stumble, that the station was crowded, that we must all be careful at our age. I said yes, careful is good. The red recording dots winked like small eyes. Somewhere, far above us, a siren began to sing. I smiled like a man who has just remembered where he put the spare key. On my tongue, dust turned to metal. I felt my heart settle into a steady beat that did not belong to fear. A uniformed officer appeared at the far end, radio raised. 2 transit agents followed, a man and a woman, moving fast. Odessa squeezed Calder's hand hard enough to blanch his knuckles. She tilted her phone, and I saw my face reflected, small and gray and still alive. That was when I understood the size of what they had done. It was not only murder they wanted. It was a story where I was the author of my own fall. A man haunted by bills. A man tired of living. A man who slipped. I folded the napkin and put it in my pocket next to the little envelope I had carried for a month, the one with the bank receipts and the names I had written on a yellow card. I touched the edge of that card and felt a door open in my mind. I lifted my head, met my daughter's eyes, and chose my first move. I stepped toward them as the officer shouted to clear the platform. Odessa's lips parted. Calder's jaw clenched. The train behind us rattled away, taking with it the last chance for this to be a mistake. I spoke softly so only they could hear. "You should have picked a place without cameras." Odessa flinched as if I had struck her. Calder swallowed. People pressed closer, hungry for a headline, ready to choose a side. I could have shouted. I could have pointed. I did not. I held my calm like a tool. The officer reached us and asked what had happened. I opened my mouth to answer, and a woman in a floral coat cried out that she had seen everything. Phones lifted higher. Odessa began to shake. Calder stepped forward with his careful smile, ready to take the stage. I put a hand on his sleeve, felt the expensive fabric, and smiled back. The officer looked at me first. "Sir," he said, "are you all right?" I nodded. "Do you want to make a statement?" I glanced at Odessa and Calder. Their faces held the kind of fear people have when a door they counted on stays closed. I could feel the envelope in my pocket, like a second heartbeat. The woman in the floral coat started talking fast, her words tumbling over each other. The officer raised his hand and said we would do this one at a time. The crowd pressed closer, and a baby began to cry. "Odessa," whispered Daddy in a voice that once could have undone me. I kept my eyes on the officer and said I would like to speak somewhere quiet. He nodded and gestured toward the stairs, away from the cameras, away from the platform's edge. I took a step, then turned back, and said one simple sentence to my daughter and her husband. I said, "I am going to tell the truth." The words hung in the damp air like those last drops from a roof after rain. Odessa's face fell and then hardened, like wet cement taking shape. Calder glanced at the tunnel, calculating exits the way he always does. The officer touched my arm and guided me toward the stairs. People parted. I heard a dozen whispers rise behind me like the hiss of the third rail. Odessa called my name again, but there was no... I did not answer the message at first. My fingers hovered above the screen as I stared at the name. Mara Jensen. I had not seen or spoken to her in 20 years, not since we both worked at the power company. Back then, she was a field inspector with steady hands and a sharp mind. We had shared coffee during storms and jokes over bad vending machine sandwiches. After Laurel died, she came to the funeral with a pot of soup and left before the service ended. I never knew why. Seeing her name now, after what had just happened, felt like someone pulling a memory out of a locked drawer. The officer guided me into a small room near the ticket machines. The walls were pale green, the kind of color meant to calm people down. A clock ticked too loudly. He offered me water and asked whether I wanted an ambulance. I said no. He studied me, probably expecting tremors or tears. I gave him neither. Years of climbing poles and lightning had taught me how to stand steady when everything shakes. He asked what had happened. I said there had been a push. I said I had fallen, and that I was lucky. I did not mention my daughter's hand or Calder's smile. Not yet. The officer nodded slowly and told me someone else had already given a statement saying they saw me lose my balance. He asked whether that sounded right. I looked at the table and said, "It sounds like someone is lying." He blinked and asked who would lie about something like that. I thought of Odessa, of her birthday parties with pink icing and paper crowns. I thought of Calder, with his perfect watch and nervous tapping. The word stuck in my throat. The officer wrote something on his pad, then said they would review the security footage. That gave me the first taste of hope. I asked how long it would take. He said a few days. I said that was fine. Patience is something you learn when you spend half your life waiting for the power to come back on. When I left the station, the world outside felt too bright. The sun hit the puddles and threw back flashes like broken glass. I found a diner 2 blocks away and sat at the counter. The waitress called me Han and poured coffee without asking. I held the phone under the table and opened Mara's message. It read, "Ephraim, I know what Calder did. Meet me tonight. 8 o'clock. The old substation on Elm." That was all. No greeting. No explanation. Just that. I stared at it for a long time, wondering how she could know anything. I should have gone to the police right then. I should have shown them the text and waited. But when you have been betrayed by blood, you stop believing in strangers in uniforms. I needed to hear her voice before I trusted anything again. I texted back one word, "Okay." Then I turned off the phone and looked out the window. Across the street, a man in a dark jacket stood near a lamppost, pretending to scroll on his phone. Every few seconds, his eyes lifted toward me. I stirred my coffee and watched him in the reflection of the window. When he realized I had seen him, he turned and walked away. The waitress brought a slice of pie and said it was on the house because I looked like I needed something sweet. I thanked her and asked whether she had seen the news about the subway. She shook her head. "City's full of near misses," she said. "You're lucky to be breathing, Han." I nodded. Lucky. That word again. People always say it when they cannot imagine the weight of what really happened. That night, I drove my old pickup to the substation. It had been shut down years ago, but I still had a key from when I worked there. The building sat at the edge of town, surrounded by rusted chain-link fences and weeds tall enough to whisper. The moon was thin and sharp. I parked behind the transformer yard and waited. At 8 o'clock, a small car rolled up, headlights off. Mara stepped out, wrapped in a brown coat and carrying a folder. Her hair had gone silver, but her eyes were the same. She looked at me like someone measuring a current before touching the wire. "I saw the video," she said. Her voice trembled slightly, like a line in the wind. "Someone uploaded it already. It's everywhere. Your daughter and that man. People are saying it looks staged." She opened the folder and showed me printouts of screenshots. Odessa's hand on my back, Calder's grin, the exact moment I fell. "But that's not all," she added. "I know what they wanted." I asked her how. She hesitated, then said, "Because Calder tried to do it to me, too. Different ways, same reason." She told me how she had invested her pension in a fund Calder managed. He had promised steady returns. Instead, the money vanished into shell companies and quiet accounts. When she confronted him, he said she had misunderstood and threatened to sue. She tried to expose him, but he buried her under paperwork and lies. When she saw my name on one of the old statements, she realized he had pulled me into the same scheme. I felt the floor tilt under me. I remembered the checks I had written, the savings I had given to help them get started. Calder had taken nearly everything. My daughter must have known. Maybe she believed him. Maybe she was afraid of losing him. Maybe she wanted to start over without the burden of an old man who had nothing left to give. Mara handed me a flash drive. "This has the documents," she said. "Emails, bank transfers, all of it. Enough to bury him." I took it, feeling its small weight in my palm. She looked at me for a long time and then said, "Don't go to the police yet. He has people there. Wait until you know who to trust." She stepped closer. "Whatever you're planning, Ephraim, make it count." Then she turned and disappeared into the dark. I stood alone in the empty substation, the hum of old transformers echoing like ghosts. I looked at the drive and thought of Odessa's face, of the way she had said "Daddy" on the platform, soft and poisonous at once. I thought of Calder's careful smile, his calm hands, his lies. When I finally got home, I sat at the kitchen table where Laurel and I once played cards. I plugged the drive into my old laptop and opened the first file. Numbers filled the screen, then names, then forged signatures. Mine among them. My stomach turned. They had planned this for months, maybe years. The next morning, I called Odessa. She didn't answer. I left a message. "I'm alive. We need to talk." I didn't mention the files. I didn't mention Mara. Just enough to let her know the game wasn't over. 2 hours later, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Calder stood on the porch with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He held a paper bag in one hand and said, "Brought you breakfast, old man. You gave us quite a scare." His voice was smooth, but his eyes were searching, calculating. I stepped aside and let him in. He placed the bag on the counter and looked around the house like someone inspecting a crime scene. "You should be more careful, Ephraim," he said. "People might think you did that on purpose." I smiled and poured coffee into 2 mugs. "People think a lot of things," I said. He laughed softly. "That they do." Then he leaned in close enough that I could smell his cologne and whispered, "Don't make this harder than it has to be." I looked him straight in the eye and said, "You already did." His smile faltered for the first time, and that was when I knew the real war had just begun. Calder stayed in my kitchen like he owned it. He didn't sit. He just stood there, tapping his polished shoes on the worn linoleum while pretending to admire the photos on the wall. Laurel in the garden. Odessa in her prom dress. Me in my work uniform, grinning beside a bucket truck. He looked at them like they were exhibits in a museum about a man he was about to erase. "Nice place," he said. "A little old, though. You should think about selling while the market's good." I poured coffee into his mug and said nothing. He smiled at the silence, mistaking it for weakness. That was his mistake. I had spent 40 years learning how to be quiet when the wind howled. Silence is where strong men sharpen their blades. He finally turned to face me. "Odessa's upset," he said. "She says you're making wild accusations. You told the police someone pushed you. That's not smart, Ephraim. They got witnesses who saw you trip." I met his eyes and asked, "And how much did those witnesses cost?" His smile froze. "What did you say?" I leaned on the counter, slow and calm. "You heard me. I've worked with men like you, Calder. Slick talkers with shiny shoes who think the world a chessboard. But you don't know me. You don't know what kind of man I become when someone hurts my blood." He smirked, but there was a flicker in his eyes, fear trying not to show itself. "You think you're dangerous, old man?" "No," I said. "I think I'm patient." He finished his coffee, set the mug down, and said, "Then you'd better stay patient, because if you start spreading stories, you'll regret it. People fall all the time, Ephraim. Sometimes they don't get back up." He left the house with that line hanging in the air. I watched his car disappear down the road, then closed the door and locked it. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from something older and stronger, determination. I walked to the back room and opened the chest I hadn't touched in years. Inside were my tools, neatly wrapped in old rags. the insulated gloves, the steel hooks, the voltage meter, the coils of wire. I picked up the gloves and felt their weight. These were the tools that had built my life. Now they would help me take it back. I spent the next few days pretending to be a ghost. I didn't answer calls. I didn't leave the house until after dark. But I listened, and I watched. The video from the subway had gone viral, just as Mara said. The online comments were split, half calling it a miracle, half saying it was a stage stunt for attention. Calder and Odessa gave interviews to local news, standing together like grieving family members. He's been under a lot of stress, Odessa said, voice trembling on cue. We think he might be confused. Calder added, he's had memory lapses lately. We're getting him help. Memory lapses. That one stung. It was the beginning of their new story, a slow rewrite of my life, a version where I was the unstable old man, not the victim. I watched the broadcast twice, then turned off the TV and whispered, "Good. Keep talking." Because every lie they told was a thread I could pull later. That night, I drove back to the substation with my laptop and Mara's flash drive. I made copies of every file, 3 in total. One I hid in the lining of my old work jacket. The second I buried in a tin box under the maple tree beside the porch. The third I mailed to a friend in the Veterans Hall with a note that read, "If anything happens to me, open this." By the third day, I decided it was time to see Odessa. I called her and said I wanted to apologize for causing trouble. Her voice softened immediately. "Daddy," she said, "I'm glad you're finally seeing reason. Come by tonight. We'll have dinner." Dinner. The word tasted like poison. But I went. Their apartment was in a glass building overlooking the river. Too clean. Too quiet. Odessa opened the door wearing a soft sweater, smiling like old times. Calder stood behind her, his smile tighter. "I'm sorry," I said as I stepped inside. "You were right. Maybe I imagined things." Calder handed me a drink. "That's good to hear," he said. "Let's just move on." We sat around a table, eating roast chicken. Odessa kept asking whether I considered moving to a retirement home. "It's safe," she said. "They take care of everything. You wouldn't have to worry about bills or cooking." I nodded slowly. "That sounds nice," I said. "But before I move anywhere, I'd like to settle my accounts. Make sure my will's clear." Calder's fork froze midair. "Your will?" "Yes," I said. "I thought I'd put everything in writing. You two have been so good to me. You deserve to know what's coming." Odessa smiled faintly, but I saw her eyes dart toward Calder. He was pretending to stay calm, but his jaw twitched. "That's considerate," he said. "After dinner." They insisted I stay for dessert. I excused myself to use the restroom. On my way back, I passed Calder's office. The door was open just a crack. Inside, the computer screen glowed blue, showing a bank portal. I leaned closer. My name was there, Ephraim Cole Trust Account. Balance, 0. I stepped back quietly. My pulse hammered in my ears. They hadn't just taken my savings. They had wiped me clean. When I returned to the table, Odessa asked if I was all right. I smiled. "Just tired," I said. "I'll head home." Calder walked me to the elevator. "Take care of yourself," he said. "We wouldn't want any more accidents." The doors closed between us. I looked at my reflection in the metal and thought, you made me small once. That won't happen again. When I got back to the truck, I texted Mara. "You were right. They took everything. Time to start." She replied within seconds. "Then let's make them lose more than money." I started the engine and drove into the dark, the city lights fading behind me. Tomorrow, the storm will begin, quiet, deliberate, and unstoppable. Sleep never came that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the train roaring past, the flash of Calder's grin, the cold calculation in Odessa's eyes. There are wounds that bleed quietly, and betrayal from your own blood is one of them. I made coffee before dawn and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the flash drive beside my mug. Mara had said to make it count. So I would. At sunrise, I drove to the outskirts of town, to the old hardware store where I used to buy supplies back when fixing things still meant something. The clerk, Kenny, recognized me right away. "Hey, Ephraim. Been years," he said, clapping my shoulder. "You working a new job?" "Something like that." I said, "Need a few cameras, motion sensors, and wiring kits." "You got them." He whistled. "Sounds serious. Building a security system." I smiled. "You could say that." By noon, I had turned my house into a nest of eyes. Every room had a camera. Tiny, silent, invisible. I wasn't going to confront Calder and Odessa yet. I was going to make them reveal themselves. 2 days later, Odessa came by unannounced. She stood on the porch, looking small under her designer coat. "Daddy," she said softly, "can we talk?" I opened the door, but kept the chain on. "Talk." Tears welled in her eyes, perfect, rehearsed tears. "I'm sorry for everything. I just want us to be family again. Calder's worried about you. He says you've been acting strange." I smiled faintly. "Strange? Like falling under trains." She flinched. "That was an accident." "Please, Daddy, stop saying things like that. You're scaring people." I unlatched the chain and let her in. The cameras watched silently as she looked around, pretending to study the photos on the wall. "You've been alone too long," she said. "It's not healthy. Calder found a beautiful place upstate. Nice gardens, good food. A retirement home. We could move you in next week." I stared at her. "And what would happen to my house?" "Oh, we'd handle that," she said too quickly. "Sell it, maybe. You don't need the stress." I laughed low and rough. "You sound just like your mother." Her eyes brightened for a moment. "Really?" "Yes," I said. "Laura used to lie beautifully, too. You must have learned it from her." Her face hardened. "You don't understand. Calder and I are trying to help you." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Help? Is that what you call trying to kill me?" Her mouth opened, then closed again. For a heartbeat, the mask slipped, and I saw a guilt flicker there, sharp as lightning. She turned toward the door. "You're sick," she said. "You need help." When the door closed behind her, I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Then I walked straight to the living room and checked the footage. Every word was there. Every twitch, every lie, every trace of fear. I copied it to a new file labeled Confession 1. That evening, Mara came by. She wore a denim jacket and carried a small black case. "You've started," she said. She came to me. I said, "Try to put me in a home." Mara smiled grimly. "That's the oldest trick. Make you look incompetent, take power of attorney, drain what's left." She opened the case and laid out a few old ID cards, printed documents, and an envelope marked Calder Pike Associates. "What's this?" I asked. "Evidence," she said. "Calder's firm is under investigation already. He doesn't know it yet, but the SEC's been sniffing around. If we can feed him the right trail, he's done." I frowned. "That's not enough. He needs to feel what it's like to lose everything. Slowly, the way I did." She studied me. "What are you thinking?" I looked toward the window, where dusk was turning the sky purple. "Calder lives on image. His whole world is built on trust. So we'll take that from him, piece by piece." We started small. Mara sent anonymous emails to a few of Calder's biggest clients using the files from the flash drive, just enough to make them suspicious. I contacted a journalist I'd once helped during a storm blackout, told her there might be a financial scandal brewing, sent her a few blurred documents. Within a week, whispers began spreading online. Is Pike Associates legitimate? Are clients losing money? Calder's name began popping up on forums and news blogs. Odessa called me in a panic. "Daddy, what's happening?" "Calder's furious. He thinks someone's targeting him." I feigned confusion. "Really? Maybe Karma finally got tired of waiting." She hung up. By the end of the month, Calder's perfect world had cracks. His biggest client froze their accounts. One of his associates quit suddenly. I kept my silence, kept feeding the story little by little through Mara's contacts. We didn't need to lie. The truth was poison enough. But revenge, I learned, doesn't stay clean. One night, around midnight, my phone rang. A deep voice said, "You should stop digging, old man." Then the line went dead. I sat in the dark for a long time after that, listening to hum of the refrigerator and the wind pressing against the windows. They were scared. That meant it was working. A few days later, I went for a walk by the river to clear my head. The air was cold and sharp. That's when I saw Calder again, standing across the street, watching me. No words, just watching. Then he raised his phone and took a picture before driving away. The next morning, a letter arrived in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. Me at the riverbank, crosshairs drawn over my chest. Mara wanted me to go to the police, but I shook my head. Not yet, I said. Let him think he's a hunter. That night, I sat in the dark again, sipping coffee gone cold, watching the clock tick past midnight. In my pocket was a flash drive, and on the screen was a freeze frame of Odessa pushing me toward the tracks. I whispered to the empty room, "Tomorrow, I start showing the world who you really are." And at that moment, lightning flashed outside, brief, bright, and perfect. It felt like the storm had just arrived. The morning came slow and heavy, thick with that kind of quiet that only happens before a reckoning. I woke before the sun, brewed a pot of coffee, and set the laptop on the table like a weapon. Today was the day I would stop hiding. Today, I would make Calder in Odessa, see what it felt like when truth became fire. Mara arrived just after dawn. She didn't knock. She just walked in, carrying a folder and her old camera. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded. More than ever. We spent the next hour preparing. I had arranged the files in simple order, forged signatures, fake transfers, my wiped account statements, and screenshots from the subway footage. I recorded a video of myself speaking directly to the camera, steady, calm, deliberate, like a man giving his last testimony. "My name is Ephraim Cole," I said. I was pushed in front of a moving train by my own family. But before that, they took everything I had. My savings, my home, my name. They wanted me gone because the truth was inconvenient. Mara filmed from across the table, eyes focused, jaw tight. I kept my voice steady, though my hands trembled just slightly. "I'm not telling this story for pity," I continued. "I'm telling it so no one else falls for their kindness." When we finished, Mara uploaded the video to 3 different accounts she had created under fake names. We attached the documents, the footage, and a timestamp that linked everything to the night of the subway incident. Then she hit publish. It took less than 2 hours for the world to notice. At first, it was just a few comments, people asking whether it was real, whether the footage had been edited. Then, someone recognized Calder from a local news clip. Another user dug into his company's public filings. And just like that, the fire caught. By noon, #ColeSurvive was trending across social media. Every major news outlet picked up the story by evening. Retired lineman claims he was pushed by family amid financial scandal. One headline read. Another said, "Subway miracle or attempted murder?" Viral video raises questions. The truth was out, but I wasn't celebrating. I knew Calder, and I knew men like him don't go down quietly. At dusk, Odessa called. Her voice was sharp with panic. "Daddy, what have you done? Do you know what you've started?" I said softly, "I started what you tried to finish." Her breathing was ragged. "Calder's lost clients. The firm's frozen. People are calling us murderers. You've ruined everything." I closed my eyes, remembering her as a little girl, running barefoot through the sprinkler, laughing so hard she couldn't breathe. That memory hurt worse than the fall. "No, Odessa," I said. "You ruined it the moment you stopped being my daughter." She hung up. That night, Mar and I watched the chaos unfold. News anchors dissected the footage frame by frame. Experts debated whether I could have survived by luck or training. One man said it was a miracle. Another said it was evidence of divine justice. But the real storm came the next morning. The SEC officially announced an investigation into Pike Associates. Calder's office was raided. Employees were seen leaving with boxes of files. Cameras swarmed their building. Reporters shouted questions, their voices echoing down the street. Calder tried to keep his cool. He gave a statement outside his apartment, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, that I was a troubled man suffering delusions. But then someone in the crowd shouted, "We saw the video!" And the look on his face broke. That was the first crack. 2 days later, a former employee came forward, an accountant named Vince. He told reporters he'd been ordered to falsify ledgers under Calder's direction. Then another witness emerged. Then another. Calder's empire collapsed like a house built on matchsticks. Odessa disappeared from public view. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I imagine her sitting in that glass apartment, curtains drawn, finally understanding what kind of man she'd chosen. Mara and I sat on the porch that evening, watching the sunset burn the sky orange. "You did it," she said quietly. "You brought them down." I shook my head. "Not yet." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "He's finished." I looked out across the field, where the last light faded into shadow. "He still thinks this is about money," I said. "He doesn't understand yet that this is about truth, about the kind that doesn't fade when the lights go off." She was about to speak when headlights appeared at the end of the road. A sleek black car rolled to a stop outside my fence. Calder stepped out. He looked nothing like the man from the TV interviews. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes hollow, his smile gone. He walked slowly up the path, one hand in his pocket. Mara reached for her phone, but I stopped her. "Let him come." Calder stopped a few feet from the porch. "You've made your point," he said. His voice was low, strained. "You want my money? Take it. You want me ruined? Done. But end this." I leaned back in the chair. "You ended at the moment you touched my daughter's shoulder and pushed." He sighed. "You think you're the hero in this story? You're just a bitter old man who couldn't let go. She wanted a life. You couldn't give it to her." I stood. "And you could? By stealing her soul?" He stepped closer. "You got no idea what she's capable of." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He smirked faintly. "You think I planned that night?" "She did. She wanted you gone. I just helped her finish it." For a second, the world went silent. Even the crickets stopped. "You're lying," I said quietly. He shrugged. "Believe what you want. But maybe you should ask her where your wife's accident report went." My breath caught. Laurel's death was an accident. Calder's smile returned. "Small? Cruel. That's what she told you." Then he turned, walked back to the car, and drove away, leaving only the smell of exhaust and the echo of a truth I wasn't ready to face. Mara looked at me, eyes wide. "Ephraim, what did he mean?" I sank back in the chair, my mind replaying every memory I had of that day in the garden. The fall, the broken ladder, Odessa's screams, the way she wouldn't meet my eyes for weeks after. And for the first time in 9 years, I felt doubt creep into the one thing I thought was sacred. I whispered into the night, "What did you do, Odessa?" The storm outside had passed, but a darker one had just begun. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the dark living room, the ticking clock slicing the silence into pieces, Calder's words replaying in my head like a cruel lullaby. "Ask her where your wife's accident report went." It had been 9 years since Laurel fell from that ladder. 9 years since Odessa called me, screaming down the phone, "Daddy, come quick!" I had run to the garden gate barefoot, the grass wet with dew, and found Laurel lying in the flower bed, her eyes open but unseeing. The coroner said her neck snapped instantly. The police ruled an accident. I never questioned it. Some things you don't question because the truth would kill you twice. But now, Calder's voice was in my ears, whispering like rot under floorboards. By sunrise, I was in the garage digging through old boxes. I found Laurel's case file, yellowed papers, faded ink, a copy of the police report. The last page was missing, the one that had listed additional notes and witness statements. I had read it once, years ago. Odessa had taken it to make a copy for insurance. It was never returned. I drove to the county office, my hands shaking on the wheel. The clerk, a young man with sleepy eyes, looked up as I approached the counter. "Morning, sir. What can I do for you?" "I need an archived accident report," I said, sliding the case number across the counter. 9 years old. He typed for a minute, then frowned. "That's strange. The file's here, but the final page is redacted. Says sealed by family request." I felt the ground tilt. Family request? Who signed it? He squinted at the screen. Odessa Coalpike. The room seemed to shrink around me. My voice came out low. Can I get a copy of the original? He hesitated. You'll need a court order. I nodded slowly, thanked him, and walked out into the cold morning. The sun glared off the car windshield, but everything looked dimmer somehow. I drove to Mara's house. She opened the door before I even knocked. You look like you've seen a ghost, she said. Maybe I have, I murmured. I told her what I'd found, every detail. She listened without interrupting, her eyes narrowing as I spoke. Ephraim, she said finally, if Odessa sealed that report, she's hiding something serious. We can get it unsealed. I know a guy, retired journalist, owes me a favor. By afternoon, we were sitting in a cluttered office above a pawn shop, the smell of old tobacco heavy in the air. The journalist, Frank, was in his 70s, with hands that trembled slightly when he poured coffee. Mara says you've got a family problem, he said. I need a sealed document, I replied. It's about my wife's death. My daughter locked it. He gave a low whistle. That's bold. Give me the case number. Frank worked quietly for 2 hours, muttering to himself as lines of text flickered across his monitor. Finally, he leaned back, exhaled, and printed a single page. Got it, he said. You might want to sit down. I read it standing. The report stated that the ladder Laurel had used had been tampered with, a saw mark across the second rung. Then enough to hold weight for a few minutes before breaking. No fingerprints were found, but a neighbor, Mrs. Calhoun, had told police she saw a young woman in the yard that morning arguing with Laurel. The witness had described her as red-haired, upset, and leaving in tears. Odessa, my knees went weak. The paper shook in my hands. Mara caught my arm before I fell. Ephraim, she whispered, we don't know for sure. I do, I said quietly. I've known for a long time. I just didn't want to see it. That night, I sat in Laurel's garden. The flowers were gone, the soil dry, but I could still see her there, kneeling among the chrysanthemums, humming a tune I never learned the name of. I remembered Odessa running out that morning, shouting that she'd been arguing with her mother about money. Laurel had wanted to sell some stock to pay for Odessa's art classes. Odessa, said Calder, told her not to. I thought it was just a family quarrel. Now, the truth was like a knife turning slowly. Mara found me there after sunset. You can't face her alone, she said softly. I have to, I replied. I need to hear from her mouth. The next morning, I called Odessa. My voice was steady, almost calm. I found the report, I said. There was silence on the other end. Then a soft intake of breath. Daddy, please. You were there, weren't you? I asked. The day your mother died. Her voice cracked. I didn't mean for it to happen. My heart turned to stone. What did you do? She wouldn't stop, she cried. She was going to sell everything. Our future, my tuition. The money Calder promised to invest. We fought. I grabbed a ladder just to scare her. It broke too soon. I tried to save her. Daddy, I swear. I closed my eyes. The sound of her crying was the same as when she was a child, but there was no innocence left in it now. I covered it up, she whispered. Calder said no one would believe it was an accident if they knew we'd fought. He told me to seal the file. Please, Daddy, I didn't mean... I hung up. The phone slid from my hand and hit the floor. Mara came in, her face pale. What did she say? I looked at her with eyes that no longer saw the room. She killed her mother, I said quietly, and he made her kill the truth. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the slow ticking of the clock. Finally, Mara said, What will you do? I looked out the window toward the darkening horizon. The same thing I did when the power went out in a storm. I said, I'll fix what's broken. The next day, I drafted a letter to the police, enclosing the unsealed report, the recording of Odessa's confession, and all the evidence from the financial fraud. I didn't sign it Ephraim Cole. I signed it for Laurel. That night, I watched the porch light flicker in the wind and thought about forgiveness. It felt far away. But justice, that was close. I mailed the envelope before sunrise. It was thick and heavy, filled with the weight of 10 lost years. The clerk at the post office didn't look twice. To him, it was just another package. To me, it was the beginning of the end. I drove home through streets that felt too quiet. Every turn sharper than I remembered. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from the slow burn of resolve. Laurel's voice was in my head, soft as wind in chrysanthemums. Do the right thing, Ephraim, even when it hurts. By afternoon, the call came. Detective Howell, an older man with a voice like gravel, asked me to come to the precinct. He said it was about developments in the Pike investigation. I agreed. When I arrived, the waiting area buzzed with reporters and cameras. Calder and Odessa's names were on every screen. The headlines were vicious now. Financial fraud, alleged murder, viral subway survivor speaks again. Howell met me in his office. He didn't waste words. "We got your letter," he said. "We verified the recordings and reopened your wife's case. Mr. Pike's already in custody. Your daughter's been brought in for questioning." I froze. "Odessa's here?" He nodded. "She asked to see you." For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I whispered, "All right." They led me to an interview room, a small space with white walls and a single camera in the corner. Odessa sat at the table, pale and trembling. Her hair was uncombed, her eyes red from crying. When she looked up and saw me, she broke. "Daddy, I'm sorry," she sobbed. "Please, you have to believe me. It was an accident. Everything was an accident." I stood in the doorway, the years between us heavy as stone. "Accidents end when people tell the truth," I said quietly. "You kept it alive because you were afraid of him, and maybe because you like what he gave you." She shook her head. "He said he'd take care of everything. He promised no one would find out. I didn't want to lose you too." I sat across from her. "You lost me the moment you pushed me toward that train." Her hands flew to her face. "I thought you'd trip. I didn't think you'd die." I finished. "No, you just wanted to erase the proof of what you become." She sobbed harder, her shoulders shaking. I wanted to stop hurting. Everything Calder touched turned to poison. I couldn't get out. He said if you kept talking, he'd tell everyone about Mom. For the first time, I felt something crack inside me, not anger, not pity, but grief, the kind that seeps through every bone and makes you wish the world would stop spinning. I realized Calder hadn't just stolen my money or my peace. He'd stolen my daughter's soul piece by piece until she couldn't tell right from wrong. Before I could speak, the door opened. Howell stepped in. "We've got what we need," he said. "Mr. Pike's confessed to manipulating her, threatening her, covering the fraud. He's facing decades." Odessa looked up, hope flickering like a match. "So it's over?" I turned to Howell. "What happens to her?" He hesitated. "Given her cooperation, she'll likely get a reduced sentence, but she'll still have to face charges. The evidence is strong." I nodded slowly. "Then let her face it. Maybe truth is the only thing that can clean her." Odessa reached across the table, her voice breaking. "Please, Daddy, say something. Tell me you don't hate me." I looked at her for a long time, remembering her as a child, running through the sprinkler, eating popsicles on the porch, her laughter brighter than summer. Then I said softly, "I don't hate you, but I can't protect you anymore." Her eyes filled again. "I'll never forgive myself." "You shouldn't," I said. "That's how forgiveness starts." Howell touched my shoulder. "You can go now, Mr. Cole." I stood and walked toward the door. Just before leaving, I turned back. "You were your mother's light, Odessa. Somewhere along the way, you let someone else dim it. Don't let the darkness keep it forever." Then I left her there, with her tears, her guilt, and the echoes of all the things we'd lost. Outside, the sky was gray and heavy. Reporters shouted questions as I stepped into the daylight. Microphones caught flashes of my face, my name, my story. But none of it mattered anymore. The world could have its headlines. I just wanted peace. Mara was waiting by her truck. "It's done?" she asked. I nodded. "It's done." We drove out of the city, away from the noise and the cameras. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The road stretched before us, quiet and endless. Finally, she said, "You know, you could leave this all behind. There's a place upstate near the lake. I go there sometimes. No self-service, no past, just water and quiet." I looked out at the fields rolling past the window. "Maybe," I said, "but first, I have something to finish." When I got home, I walked straight to the garden. The earth was cold under my boots. I knelt by the old patch of soil where Laura used to plant her flowers and dug until I hit something solid. The tin box I'd buried weeks ago. I opened it, took out the second copy of the evidence, and placed it beside Laurel's old photograph. "You can rest now," I said quietly. "It's over." A soft wind rustled the dry stems. For the first time in years, the garden felt alive again. That night, I turned off every light in the house except the porch lamp, the one Laurel always kept burning, so no one comes home in darkness. I sat in my chair, watching it glow through the window, and thought about all the storms I'd lived through. I had survived the fall. I had faced the truth. And though my hands were empty, my heart, scarred and tired, finally felt full. Just as I was about to drift into sleep, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "It's not over. You don't know everything." The message had no name, no number trace, just those 6 words glowing in the dark. And beneath them, an attachment. It was a photo of Mara, smiling, standing beside Calder Pike, taken 10 years ago. The photo glowed on my phone screen, and every nerve in my body went still. Mara, my ally, my confidant, the woman who'd stood beside me through this entire storm, was standing next to Calder Pike, both smiling as if they were at a company picnic. The date stamp at the bottom corner read, April 2015. That was the same spring Laurel died. My first thought wasn't anger. It was disbelief. My mind clawed at every reason it couldn't be true. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was taken at a public event. But deep down, a quiet, familiar voice said, "You've been here before, Ephraim. You've trusted snakes before." I didn't call her right away. I needed to think. I scrolled back through my messages with Mara, rereading every word, every "we'll fix this" and "you can't win." Each one now tasted different, like poison sweetened with honey. Outside, the wind had risen. The trees were bending in the yard, whispering like they knew the ending before I did. I opened the old tin box again. Inside, next to Laurel's picture, was a flash drive, the last untouched copy. My insurance. My truth. I slid it into my pocket and got in the truck. Mara's house sat at the edge of town, a small white bungalow with chipping paint and a porch that leaned forward, tired from years of storms. Her truck was parked outside. The lights were on. When she opened the door, her face lit up like nothing was wrong. "Ephraim," she said softly, "you shouldn't be out this late. Everything okay?" I stepped inside, closed the door, and set my phone on the table between us. The photo was still on the screen. "Tell me when this was taken." Her smile froze. She looked down, then up again. "Where did you get that?" "It came to me," I said, "along with a message. You don't know everything. So tell me, what do I know?" Mara sighed and sank into a chair. Her voice dropped. "I worked for him, Ephraim, years ago, before Laurel's accident. Calder was expanding his firm, and I handled some of the early investments. He promised people security. I believed him." I stared at her, my pulse loud in my ears. "You didn't tell me that." "I didn't want to," she said. "When I found out what he'd done, what he'd stolen, I quit. But by then it was too late. He used my name on documents. He made me complicit. I spent years trying to bury that part of my life. Until I came along," I said. She nodded, tears in her eyes. "When I saw you on the news, I thought maybe I could finally make it right. Helping you destroy him was my way of undoing what I helped create." Her words hit me like cold rain. I wanted to believe her. Part of me still did. But trust was a currency I no longer had. "You should have told me," I said quietly. "I was afraid you'd see me as one of them." I looked at her for a long moment. "You are one of them. But you're also the reason he's gone. So maybe we're both something in between. She wiped her eyes. There's more, she said. That photo, it wasn't just business. Calder and we were close. Before Odessa, the room went silent. I took a slow breath. You helped him ruin my daughter's life. I didn't know she was yours, Mara said. Not until after Laurel's death. By then, Calder was already with her. I tried to warn her. She wouldn't listen. The wind outside grew louder, rattling the windows. So what now? I asked, You expect forgiveness? She shook her head. No, I just wanted you to know before someone else told you. I turned away, staring out the window at the dark yard. My reflection looked back, older, harder, unfamiliar. I buried one truth this morning. I said, I don't have a strength for another. She stood, stepping closer. Ephraim, you can't live in revenge forever. I faced her. Revenge ended when he went to prison. I tapped the phone. This is about peace. And peace starts with the truth, even when it burns. I walked past her to the door. Goodbye, Mara. She didn't follow. Outside, the storm broke open. Rain came down in sheets, washing the world clean or trying to. I drove to the bridge outside town and parked by the railing. Below, the river churned, wild and black. I took the flash drive from my pocket, held it in my hand. All the files, all the evidence, every cruel, perfect proof of what had been done. It had served its purpose. I tossed it into the river. The splash was small, almost gentle. Then it was gone. By the next morning, the headlines had shifted. Calder Pike confesses a fraud. Faces 25 years. Daughter of victim cooperates with investigation. Odessa's statement had gone public. She named Calder as the one who pressured her to lie, to hide, to destroy me. She asked for forgiveness. I didn't answer. Some prayers need time before they reach heaven. 2 weeks later, I received a letter. It was from Odessa. Daddy, they let me see sunlight again today. It reminded me of the garden. I know you can't forgive me, but I'm learning to forgive myself. I want to plant flowers again someday. Chrysanthemums, like Mom's. Maybe one day, when I get out, I'll plant them beside yours. I love you, even if it took the worst thing in the world to remember how. Odessa. I folded the letter and set it on Laurel's grave. The soil was soft and smelled of rain. I planted a small pot of chrysanthemums beside it. Yellow, her favorite. That evening, I sat on the porch as the sun went down, the light spilling gold across the fields. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for something terrible to happen. The air was still. The quiet was kind. I poured a cup of tea and looked at the empty chair beside me. You'd have liked the ending, Laurel. I whispered. Messy but honest. A soft breeze moved through the trees, almost like an answer. Behind me, inside the house, the phone rang. I didn't move. I let it ring until it stopped. Whatever waited beyond that call could wait a little longer. Because for the first time since that day in the subway, I wasn't running anymore. I was home. My dear, did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.